Welcome to the NEVERMORE podcast.
After so many decades of patronage by the world's greatest empire, after so many potential agreements were rejected by opening fire, after crushing so many uprisings, now they're making their ultimate bid, pursuing their final solution, just like the Nazis did. They forced refugees into ghettos, then set the ghettos aflame, murdering writers and poets, and so no one remembers their names, killing their entire families, the grandparents, women and kids, the uncles and cousins and babies, just like the Nazis did. They're bombing all means of sustaining human life at all. See the few shelters remaining. Watch as the tower blocks fall. They're bombing museums and libraries in order to get rid of any memory of the people who lived here, just like the Nazis did. They're saying these people are animals, and they should all end up dead. They're sending soldiers into schools and shooting children in the head. The rhetoric is identical, and with Gaza off the grid, they've already said what happens next, just like the Nazis did. Words of war for domestic consumption and lies for all the rest, to try to distract our attention among their enablers in the West. Because Israel needs their imports to keep those pallets on the skids. They need fuel, they need missiles, just like the Nazis did. They're using food as a weapon. They're using water that way too. They're trying to kill everyone or make them flee, it's true. As the pundits talk of after the war, like with the fall of Madrid, the victors are preparing for more, just like the Nazis did. But it's after the conquest's complete, if history is any guide, when the occupying army is positioned to decide. When disease and famine kills whoever may have hid behind the ghetto walls, just like the Nazis did. All around the world, people are trying to tell. There's a genocide unfolding, ringing alarm bells. But with such a powerful axis and so many lucrative bids, they know who wants their money, just like the Nazis did. After so many decades of patronage by the world's greatest empire, after so many potential agreements were rejected by opening fire, after crushing so many uprisings, now they're making their ultimate bid, pursuing their final solution, just like the Nazis did. Just like the Nazis did. Just like the Nazis did.
Today we are here with none other than David Rovics. So if you're unfamiliar with David Rovics, he is an anarchist folk singer, very much in the tradition of Joe Hill and Pete Seeger. I could call him a protest singer, has toured the world many times, and recently joined the NEVERMORE cast of contributors. So this is, I suppose, our most famous member. and it's an honor to have you with us, David. How are you doing today?
Thank you, Crow. I'm doing very well, aside from all the horrors constantly going on in the world, which is a perpetual backdrop, but currently a really, really particularly horrible one. But here in Scandinavia, people are protesting every day, thousands, tens of thousands in all the cities every day. In Copenhagen, they got the slogan is "Everyone in the streets for Palestine." So every day there's been thousands of people in different neighborhoods starting out in Copenhagen and then marching into the center of the city. Yeah,
that's wonderful.
That's fantastic.
Can you tell us about your Scandinavian ceasefire tour?
Yeah, I already had this tour planned before the most recent events, but it became the ceasefire tour for obvious reasons. But I tour in Scandinavia a lot. I have probably a bigger fan base in Scandinavia than anywhere, and then there's the happy coincidence of a highly well organized left, complete with all sorts of institutions like unions and left parties and housing cooperatives, tenant cooperatives, unions. Just the kind of infrastructure of the left that exists here is like nothing that people in the US anyway are familiar with, and it's the support for the arts, both within and outside of the left, all over Europe is just 100 times what it is in the US. 100. That's exact. That's an exact statistic. It is 100 to 1 what we spend on supporting the arts in the US. So, and it's very obvious, and that's why I tour here all the time. Combination of.
Say that's accurate to your own experience, because you used to live in Europe, and you're an artist. Kid's actually a ballet dancer, was a ballet dancer for years.
I would say it's really hard probably to support never-ending wars and the arts, so you got to choose one or the other.
Yeah. The U.S. always chooses supporting the never-ending wars.
So you're saying, David, that in Scandinavia the left hasn't lost the plot, or not to the same degree? Is that accurate?
Yeah, right. No, I think this the kind of stuff that we've all become much more familiar with than anyone would have wanted to. This kind of culture is just so much less of a phenomenon across Europe. It's really limited to specific sort of political social milieus in certain countries, like in the sort of anarchist milieu in Germany. There's long been a big problem with this kind of thing because of their specific historical thing with anti-Semitism and fear of being labeled anti-Semitic.
Is that right?
The anti-Germans. Yeah, they started around the fall of the wall, and they had in the early 90s, and they have gone through a lot of different political mutations. They started out being relatively reasonable and focused on opposing the potential of German fascism rising again with German reunification, and they were especially concerned with how refugees were going to be treated in the new unified Germany. And they had real legitimate fears that were realized about persecution, pogroms against refugees in East Germany after the fall of the wall. And so, I mean, things were very different in the early 90s, but what they eventually mutated into by the time I became acquainted with them in 2002, they had become a bizarre kind of cult that was trying to find anti-Semitism everywhere on the left that it did not exist, and occasionally places that it did, but really overwhelmingly they were looking for it in places it did not exist, and just throwing virtual bombs into all sorts of left communities and spaces and organizations by making these baseless allegations of anti-Semitism, which were often grounded in ideas like criticizing bankers is a veiled form of anti-Semitism and this kind of thing that we're all now unfortunately very familiar with. But back then it was like totally bonkers kind of stuff. But in Germany specifically, this kind of rhetoric could at least make people afraid of associating with someone who's getting accused, even if the accusations are based on he criticizes capitalism and this kind of nonsense, or he criticizes Israelis.
That's a nice segue to something that I wanted to talk to you about. So I've described you as one of the leading leftist critics of cancel culture, and I've been following what you have been subjected to over the past few years, and it's just absolutely atrocious. And it was very upsetting. Just this morning, I was reading a piece that you wrote, which had to do with you showing up to a rally for Gaza, being screamed at by someone. It sounds like your friends didn't really, have your back very much. And this is very much something that I'm familiar with as well. I think a lot of people on the left are. And it just sounds like you've been through an absolute Kafkaesque nightmare over the last few years. And
Yeah.
I wanted to get your story, because I want to get your story directly from you about all of that. What started it? What role COINTELPRO type police campaigns might have to do with it, and anything you'd like to talk
right.
about.
I mean, the thing about COINTELPRO and the police and all that is, you don't get to find out about that stuff till later. I mean, like usually, and with things like the now we know, and now it's a matter of the public record, and it is nobody can argue with it. FOIA requests and all that. Now we know, like for example, that the FBI was actively trying to sabotage the careers of Dave Van Ronk, Phil Oakes, and Buffy Sainte-Marie. We know that now. That's all part of the public record, and and they were doing all that in the 60s and 70s. And this is clear, and we don't know whose careers they're messing with now, but we can be sure that they're doing the same kinds of things to the same kinds of people as they were then, and just as they were long before any of those artists were born. To dangerous artists, dangerous activists, dangerous thinkers, dangerous people of all sorts, dangerous organizers. They have a long list of enemies, and they know well, who are the dangerous people, and they know that artists are part of that group of dangerous people. No doubt about that.
With a focus on anti-war seemed to be back in the 60s anyway. It seemed to be a big focus for artists.
How did he die?
Jimi Hendrix was on that. Yeah.
Bob Marley. Seriously.
Yeah, and the artists, specifically the three artists that they definitely were persecuting and monitoring and sabotaging. Phil Oakes, Dave Van Ronk, and Buffy Sainte-Marie. They were all known for their anti-war songs and stances. So it was that was definitely.
The campaign against Buffy Sainte-Marie continues, by the way, just with the CBC releasing a whole documentary, throwing serious shade on her. Apparently there is something to, the allegations about her lying about her heritage. But I'll also point out that, this, a cancel campaigning doesn't necessarily need to involve lying. It can also involve kind of, making a big deal out of anything that might reflect badly upon somebody.
Why are they going after her now? Why do this research now? I mean, I think I don't want to discount the validity of the accusations or discount the stories or the experience of Buffy's family that she grew up with in Massachusetts. And, I mean, it's complicated, but the fact is, regardless of whether they, thought she was lying about her heritage or any of that stuff back in the 60s and 70s, they were going after her for her political positions and because she was a well-known artist who had written songs like Universal Soldier and was, very prominent part of the, anti-war movement milieu in North America. So you know, that's why they were going after. I mean, I think, you know, it's important to, you know, take, well, I mean, you know, once these kinds of accusations are out there, then I guess you gotta like see what they're about, and but like you say, like they're made for what is it about the timing, you know, and what's the ulterior motives, that you also got to wonder about that. And then, of course, in other cases, as I think it's something I read on Nevermore. Now I don't remember if it was you or somebody else who wrote it, but you know, somebody talking about the accusations around Ward Churchill, and you know, these are, it's also like the timing and the reasons for making them, and who's looking into it, and what is it all about? It's all
He's
this
literally
very,
the guy who wrote the book on COINTELPRO, and then he's getting canceled, and the people are like, "Oh well, no, I guess he shouldn't have, pretended to be native." And it's like, well, wait, what exactly did he say? When did he say it? You know, he is part native. Did he claim to be more native than he actually is? And by the way, who fucking cares? You know, like, is his scholarship in question? Oh, it was in question, but it turns out that the allegations against them turned out to be
well, yeah,
not
that's the thing. I mean, exactly. Like they found they at that university board review, you know, ultimately looked at all 17,000 supposed, errors, and found there was all a bunch of nonsense, you know. But but when the allegations are hanging over your head, then they do their work for them. They do all the work. You know, they don't. It doesn't matter whether they're true. I mean, you know, in so many cases.
exactly. And I want to read something directly from you, because it's about this, and I happen to have it handy. Says the U.S. and many other countries stand on the brink of fascism, world war, and climate chaos. Meanwhile, the U.S. left is in a state of paralysis or collapse or something along those lines. Most of the best organizers across the country face a deluge of online disinformation about them, amplified by both nefarious actors as well as by well-meaning, self-styled activists who are engaging in some version of speaking truth to power by publicly attacking the reputation of a local organizer every time they post something online because they are guilty of one transgression or another. To put it more directly, most of the best organizers across the country have been canceled. That is, they have been rendered largely ineffective due to the cloud of suspicion that surrounds them everywhere they go, especially online. I don't probably need to explain why having a cloud of suspicion around you at all times makes it difficult for you to do good organizing. When you have that cloud around you, you are toxic. The association with you will lead to the people associating with you having to spend time and energy defending their actions and looking into the allegations surrounding you. Regardless of whether they think there's anything legitimate about the accusations surrounding you, people will tend to avoid you for their own safety, comfort, peace of mind, etc. And so this is very much, you know, something that is, you know, rings true with my own experience. You know, I have been politically active basically my entire adult life. You know, I was going to anti-globalization protests when I was in like grade 6 or 7. I was involved in anti-war organizing in high school. And, you know, I have, you know, people who know who I am. You know, I've been active for a very long time. And, you know, I've had my name dragged through the mud multiple times. And, you know, every time, like, there's a kind of process of weeding out where, you know, I lose some fair weather friends, but, you know, luckily I have enough real friends that, you know, they can't entirely get rid of me, I guess. But, you know, each time that this happens, then whatever momentum, you know, I had in whatever I was engaged with at, you know, that particular moment in time just basically is completely dissipated, you know? So even though in my case and your case, they haven't succeeded in kind of totally getting rid of us, it's still this massive demotivating force, you know? And
Big time. Yeah.
and
It's such an effective thing. You know, and it's effective when you're in a cultural milieu, you know, like the way the left tends to be in, particularly in the United States, where people are apt to believe, or at least give some kind of credence to, allegations, regardless of how bizarre they may be. It's like people seem to think, you're basically guilty until proven innocent is the sort of basic MO of the left in the US nowadays. But that is not the way it is in Europe, and even in Canada. It's better than in the US.
I'd be surprised with that. I mean, I got run out of Montreal for I was accused of raping this trans person who I never even had sex with, and there was plenty of evidence for anybody who cared to to look into it that would have led any reasonable person to conclude that this person was mentally ill, mentally unstable, a pathological liar, had a personality disorder, and it goes on and on. But nobody, because of this kind of axiom of believe survivors even if they're liars,
right?
Because of the axiom, nobody was willing to stand up for me, and that, I think, is the important thing about cancel culture, is that it is entirely dependent upon people being unwilling to stand up for their friends. And
that's why it makes a perfect psyop tool. And that is I think that's exactly why counterintelligence psyops tend to work and at absolutely dismantling systems from the inside, resistance movements, things like that. And sort of kind of you can see it in both of your personal experiences, but then you zoom out and you look at the larger, broader movement, and you're like, oh yeah, that is exactly how that works.
So like the way it works here in Europe, like the way it works in the United States with this kind of mentality, and with how susceptible people are to believing the victim, no matter whether the victim is some nutcase like the person making accusations against you, and like the person who was screaming at me at the rally. Here in the US, the culture, in particularly in places like Portland, Minneapolis, certain places where there's a specific kind of identitarian left that has become dominant, they just believe the anybody claiming to be the victim, regardless. And then, like, at the rally, I had this one person who did sort of like intervene, and who seemed to be trying to calm things down. I mean, he did get her to stop screaming for a little while, but he was operating on the assumption that there was some kind of a legitimate complaint or criticism that this person had of me, and that I had probably done something that is that warrants me being held for accountable for something. And the basis for that, in his explanation, was that this person was upset and screaming at me. So which is very weird circular logic, and it doesn't allow for the possibility that the person screaming at you might be an FBI agent, or might be somebody with borderline personality disorder, or it might be somebody who's a member of a weird anti-fascist cult. But speaking, tying loose ends, we were talking about the anti-Deutsch before. One of the people who Rose City Antifa in 2007 in Portland was from Germany, and I believe, from what I could gather from writing online on their website, seems to be coming out of this kind of anti-Deutsch scene, and for whatever reason moved to Portland, and for whatever reason, coincidentally or whatever, was involved with the founding of Rose City Antifa, which is a specific part of the broader anti-fascist movement, and it shouldn't be confused with the broader anti-fascist movement. It's a cult, and it's a specific local Portland cult with their bizarre, looking for anti-Semitism under every rock obsessions. And it is not necessarily, they have an impact on the anti-fascist movement, on the internet and beyond Portland, but it's specifically a Portland phenomenon that, doesn't necessarily share a whole lot in common with anti-fascists that are actually going after the right. Regardless of what you think of the tactics, I have a lot of criticism of them.
A bit and just talk about Portland specifically, because I mean, Portland probably about 10 years ago was kind of known as a kind of countercultural mecca, or maybe a bit further back than that, I mean, Kit, you used to live in Seattle when it was kind of like a center.
Me too. I lived in Seattle in the late
Yeah.
80s and early 90s.
Oh,
And
nice.
San
Yeah.
Francisco at that time.
Oh, right on. Yeah. That was a good time and a great place to be. It seemed like.
It was. It was a good time because
then over
gentrification hadn't started yet in any kind of significant way.
I missed you
and
there.
then
'Cause
in recent years. Oh, sorry.
No, we got a little
I
delay.
just wanted to say that in recent years, Portland has kind of become like, you know, the poster city for, you know, how everything woke goes to shit, basically, you know, and it does kind of seem like your, you know, team that you were part of has, you know, become kind of nightmarish, you know, where, you know, you are, you know, like verbally assaulted in public and people take the side of the person, let's face it, because you're a white man, you know.
So Crow, you're cutting out a little bit there. There's something that your connection might not be so great, but if you repeat that.
I just wanted to ask you about Portland, and I'll be quiet.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we heard, I think, almost everything except for the part where you were just asking a question before. Yeah. Anyway, Portland. Yeah. Why did there's different things going on here. For one thing, it's the sort of epicenter of cancel culture and left dysfunctionality in the United States. No question about that. It is the most dysfunctional city in the United States in terms of the left. I mean, you can easily find better analysis and better numbers for any number of different kinds of things that we associate with Portland being, you know, kind of good for in places like Knoxville, Tennessee. I mean, if you want to see people, you know, like, you know, opposing the right, you know, you go to the South, you know, you can see much better organization than you'll find in Portland, where people just are, this kind of element of the left is much too busy attacking other leftists to do any kind of serious organizing, you know, attacking other leftists and, you know, writing books, or, you know, they don't, any kind of organizing. I don't see much of it happening. And then, of course, the media plays into it a lot because they only want to, you know, the mass media is very interested in anything that smacks of anti-fascism in such a way that they can paint the Republicans as a rising far right menace. And so anytime, you know, they can get anti-fascists to, in one way or another, play a role in to promote the Democratic Party, which is not necessarily what any of these anti-fascists actually want to be doing, to be clear. You know, I'm not suggesting that, but they're used all over the place as a tool to promote the Democratic Party, because anybody who's doing far right analysis, far right research, or any kind of exposure of far right activities, as valid as all of these kinds of things are to do, all of that can easily and is constantly being weaponized as a tool for promoting the Democratic Party and attacking the Republican Party, and, you know, not in the way that any of the people doing this research would probably like to see their work being used. But this is how they're being used, and, you know, it's all social engineering, you know, on a meta, you know, mega, you know, level. But another thing that's important to note that is distinct from this to some extent, in a way, you know, also related, but another thing that Portland, the reason why Portland is falling apart is because the rent has tripled in the past 15 years. So it's impossible for a lot of people to survive. And so people that had been living in, you know, shitty little overcrowded apartments are now living in their cars or in tents or whatever. And it's a totally dystopic situation that is also to be found in every other major city on the West Coast, and increasingly other cities around the country. You know, but so there's that whole phenomenon of capitalism and gentrification and the, you know, the financialization of the real estate industry, and you know, the way that they are, you know, making just like unprecedented profits by turning, you know, both real estate and the rental market into a source of investment and profit. And, you know, they just gouge people. I mean, I don't know what the end game is, or when they predict, you know, there's going to be, you know, riots against the landlords in the streets and mass whatever's going to happen. But it's just a totally untenable situation. There's the stress in the air in Portland and all throughout the country. It's so palpable that people living with market rate rent. It's just totally. There's nothing predictable about life. It's completely precarious. It's no earnings. Nobody's wages ever goes up fast enough to keep up, no matter what you do. It's it's a country for the rich. If you're in the top 20%, you're okay. It's anybody else is really struggling across the United States, and the media doesn't paint because they're owned by the rich, and also so many of the people working for the media are not in that kind of situation. But the victim thing on the left that's become so problematic and has allowed so much division to happen, and the kinds of things that you, Crow, and I have both experienced so much. I mean, this is much less of a problem in Europe, and I think that's largely because the left is still a largely offline phenomenon in Europe, and it's organized. And it's been organized along the same kinds of lines for a long time, and they have meetings and they talk to each other in rooms, not on Facebook, and they have rallies, and and you can have a history, and your history can matter, and if you're older, people actually assume you might know more than because of that, and there's this almost from a U.S. perspective, almost bizarre kind of respect for older people, and assumption that people who have been activists for decades might actually know a little more about something than somebody who just started out a couple of years ago. This kind of I'm so unused to being sort of admired in that way, in the U.S. context, that when I come here and have young people, treat me like I'm somebody special, I'm a bit shocked. That's almost like a cultural, like an unfamiliar thing at this point, which is also kind of strange, because it's quite natural to look up to older people. Actually, it's quite natural to assume they might know something that you don't. This is normal globally, and for a very, very long time, probably forever. And it's this totally natural why that would be the case, and the worship of youth is unnatural, and it is a media phenomena that's a very destructive phenomenon, because teenagers actually don't know much, and you really don't want to rely on teenagers to save the world or organize a social movement. It's a terrible idea.
I agree. And it's interesting that you talk about the difference of them being kind of offline and in actual physical spaces organizing, because as we were talking about the Portlandia kind of issue, and the broader left movement in North America being, completely impotent in so many ways, I was thinking about that it's I mean, it wasn't that long ago that I remember activist spaces being super anti-tech in a lot of ways. Like, people were like, don't bring your little, spy devices in here. You know what I mean? Like, let's not have these conversations on your phones. And then it turned into Instagrams and just like kind of bullshit. And when I watched that happen, I thought, then you get this rise of identity politics mixed with the algorithms of social media, and it just kind of just characterized, this problem that we've been spending a lot of time talking about. But instead of worrying about online activism, like, why, in Portland, it sounds like they need to be fucking working on housing co-ops and the real sort of like organized left spaces that help people live decent lives in light of the sort of gentrification problems that you were speaking of. I think we didn't really go into it for our listeners, really, but I think the event that got you canceled, maybe you want to share a little bit about that. What was it that this person was yelling at you for, and how is it that you became sort of this attack figure, in spite of all the positive work that you've done?
Sure. When you mention housing issues, though, just to say that probably in Portland, the most destructive cancellation campaign that has affected what we might call the left in the city was directed at Margot Black, who is the founder of the Portland Tenants United organization, which is the best group to fight for tenants' rights, in the state of Oregon that I know of. And actually has accomplished quite a bit, but she is so she has such suspicion, clouds hanging around her, and has so much explaining to do about her, all the allegations, completely ridiculous allegations of racism that she has had to face for years now. It has rendered her basically unable to function in any kind of a left scene in the Portland area. She's still able to do great work, but only like organizing in sort of spaces that are really distinctly separate from sort of the left, like in the suburbs, for example, where she can still organize tenants there and they'll love her, But yeah, Portland, is just like a toxic stew. But what happened? Well, I mean, if we're going I would say that the cancellation campaigning and accusations about anti-Semitism with me go back actually to 2002 with the Anti-Deutsch, and actually go back to 2000 when what was to be my second tour of Israel was canceled by the Israeli folk music fans who had booked my gigs there, which I was just soon going to be doing. But then I wrote a song about the Second Intifada, and they got 9 out of my 10 coming gigs canceled, and with me being called an anti-Semite and a Nazi for being sympathetic to Palestinian children who Sharon had just massacred. This is the mentality. It's a right mentality. It's not a marginal mentality among Israeli Jews. This is a incredibly racist society. I've never seen anything like it, and I'm from the United States, so for whatever that's worth. This campaign against me most recently began in January of 2021, when during the Capitol siege in Washington, D.C., I thought, that it would be interesting to talk to somebody who is familiar with the social milieu, political perspective of the 40,000 people who were at that moment laying siege to the Capitol building and killing cops and whatever else. And I emailed Matthew Heimbach, who I had been in touch with actually for years, but on email, and asked him if he wanted to do an interview, knowing that it would be, that there would be some potential consequences for me, but not really thinking it through as thoroughly as I might have. But Heimbach was one of the organizers of the Unite the Right rally in 2017 in Charlottesville, Virginia, which I wrote a song about at the time after Heather Heyer was killed by a right-winger driving a car trying to kill as many people as possible. And it seems almost a miracle that only one person died, the way that guy was trying to run through the crowd. But luckily he didn't have a truck like in Nice. He just had a small car. But so yeah, Heimbach was a white supremacist and became a media celebrity on Fox and on the right-wing media for a brief period of time when he was, organizing White Lives Matter rallies on campuses and getting banned and all that. Yeah, he formed the Traditionalist Workers' Party, which is his, was his very small right-wing party. And then, as I already knew from our communication, our fairly extensive communication in letters and emails over the past few years, he had become profoundly disillusioned with the whole right-wing thing, and had, as far as I could tell, very enthusiastically, with the kind of enthusiasm that you would expect only from an autistic person who Heimbach is, which explains, nobody wants to consider the humanity of anybody these days, but it explains a lot of his emotional disconnection from reality and his ability to be a monstrously racist right winger in the first place. It's not just because of his experiences as a young adult and that alienated him from the identitarian left on college campuses, which were genuinely real and very interesting to recount and hear about. But it's also his autism that plays a big role in both his I think his right wing phase and his current Marxist-Leninist phase. Whether this is permanent now or he's going to be a Marxist-Leninist for the rest of his life, I have no idea, and I really don't. It's not my concern in particular. This is just one guy who, I don't worry about. I have interesting correspondence with, and don't agree with his politics. I didn't agree with his politics when he was a white supremacist, and don't agree with his politics now either. And I don't agree with the politics of a lot of the people that I'm friends with or acquaintances with or for whom I do gigs. I frequently do gigs for Maoists. I frequently do gigs for Trotskyists, frequently for anarchists, frequently for social democrats who support NATO. I mean, I do gigs for a lot of people I have profound disagreements with, and if I only did gigs for people I agreed with, I don't know how many I do. And certainly I have no interest in only talking to people I agree with. I think it's just fascinating. People I disagree with, and I think it's also vitally important for preventing the rise of the right, to understand why the right is so popular, and to recruit people that might be joining the right to the left. And the way we do that is by, first of all, having a left movement that's worth anybody joining, that has any interest for people like Matthew, that is of interest to the white majority of the United States, and young white people coming out of white suburbs having their particular social experiences that are common to tens of millions of Americans. This is something that needs to be understood, related to. These are potential recruits that are important. We're not going to have any kind of a functional left union movement, anti-war movement, or anything else like that if it doesn't have massive white participation, massive white Christian participation. The United States is a primarily white Christian country, and we got to get our fucking heads around that. I mean, we got to talk to these people, and
I'm an advocate for that, actually, because I grew up in a congregation, and
Crow, we can't hear anything you're saying.
Okay. Is there another place you could move to where there's better reception, maybe? We want to hear what you got to say. Crow's writing, I'll shut up. We don't want you to shut up, Crow. We just want to understand you. Where are you now?
I think that if you guys can't hear me, then just continue.
Much better.
Oh, it's much better?
No, you're much better now. Things have just improved. Sit there. Yeah. Wherever you just moved to. Yeah, that's good. What were you just saying now?
Well, I just wanted to say that I think that there has been a campaign against Christianity. Like when I grew up, when I was growing up, I grew up in a Christian congregation, Mennonite congregation. There was very much an activist consciousness to it, and I think that it was only following the September 11th and kind of the Bush years that Christianity came to be seen as a right-wing thing, which, it certainly wasn't at all. I was definitely raised, to believe that the teachings of Jesus included, peacefulness, basically. And so I do think that we are seeing a turning away from secular materialism and towards religion again. I think that there's a recognition that religion certainly has been used as a tool of social control. I think it's also been as a, in recent movements. I mean, if we look to, the civil rights movement, both Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, they were both coming very much from a religious place. And I could list tons of, people who would be widely admired by leftists or by people who concern themselves with social justice, who are motivated by their, by religious conviction, moral conviction, which they interpret through a religious lens. And yeah, like that's something that I personally, like I have been participating for many years in Indigenous ceremonies, sweat lodges, fasts, sun dances, and this kind of thing. And I think that it's kind of helped me to get through this Kafkaesque nightmare, because before you came on, David, Kit and I were just talking about, it's like, the first time that I was canceled, it was me and, my girlfriend, who we were just being canceled for absolute bullshit. We called our like punk house the Asylum, and we were getting canceled because the Asylum.
Then you're being discriminatory against crazy people or something, right? So there's word policing, right?
I'm a diagnosed schizophrenic. I should have all the fucking crazy.
But you can't talk about asylums. Yeah. And it's just ridiculous word policing anyway. This idea that like there's only, I've run into this kind of word policing so much in the past few years, and like in a way that I never ran across it before. I mean, there's long been, centuries of this concept of artistic license. This concept that somebody who's in trying to write in whether it's a song or prose, or in some way that they're trying to creatively express anything, that's you're allowed to use words in unusual ways to do that. And but now it's like you got to examine somebody's lyrics before you let them on a stage, or
and it just contributes to this super uptight fucking culture where people are just tiptoeing around, afraid to offend each other. And personally, like, I come from a punk background, it's like the complete fucking opposite of everything. Punk is everybody knows the term anal retentive, but most people don't know the term anal expulsive. Anal expulsive is just fucking let it out, just say what you have to say, and who cares whether it offends anybody, because there's value to just expressing yourself, whether or not it's going to be pleasing to anybody. That is more the punk spirit. And so what's that?
Used to be.
It used to be. Well, I think it still is. It's just, but.
Well, okay. So now that we're getting into I was going to say, now that we're getting into the reversal of terms, that I think indicates this new world that we're living in, right? This topsy-turvy world where anti-fascism turns into fascist word police, and like this kind of really fascinating flip of terminology that we all kind of thought we understood, and now we don't. I didn't want to cut you off, but I was curious about kind of directing it towards like maybe some of these agents of this specific kind of cancel culture policing that you guys both have experience with. In particular, if anyone wants to speak to about Shane Burley and who that is, and maybe how he's responsible.
Why don't I set it up for you, David? Because I think that before we should talk about Shane Burley, we should talk about Alexander Reed Ross, because Alexander Reed Ross is a known intelligence agent. And so, there's been heavy suspicions on him since at least 2008. But it was in 2018, but it was in 2020 or 21, I believe, that the Gray Zone published an expose about him. And so now it's on the record. He's an intelligence agent. He has basically disappeared, or at least he's not public face of anything anymore. But he was a leading Antifa ideologue. And he used to manage the Earth First Newswire. He had some association with AK Press, and there just hasn't been the soul searching that should have happened after he was exposed. And I published a piece about this called "The Secret History of Antifa," which starts with Alexander Reed Ross, and talks about the kind of tactics that he was engaged in. And basically, he liked to tar everybody with a brush of crypto fascism. Even when what people were actually doing U.S. imperialism, notably in Syria.
Up again. What's it? Back up to crypto fascism.
So Alexander Reed Ross was a one-trick pony who just accused everybody of fascism. He wrote a book called Against the Fascist Creep, and he would accuse people of crypto fascism for opposing NATO imperialism, bombing Syria, for example, is the originator of this idea of red-brown alliances, which is supposedly that fascists and state communists are working together, to I don't know, like, it makes zero sense. So it's hard to even summarize these ideas. But
that's part of the charm, or part of the problem with these people, is that they don't make much sense. It's really circular, weird, very, very Germanic logic, and the way that the very anti-Deutsch style, bizarre logic that's really, it takes a long time to try to even figure out, like, how do they arrive at this kind of idea that an anti-fascist is a fascist, or that peace negotiations means fascism, or all sorts of strange ideas that they have about everything, or that if you are talking about an actual very, very legitimate conspiracy hypothesis based on past conspiracies that were very, very similar, then you're going to be painted as a conspiracist right away, whatever that is. Speculation is conspiracism. I mean, they're all kinds of new vocabulary words, and they paint themselves as the people who know what fascism is and what anti-fascism is, and basically they know about history, and nobody else really understands it like they do. If you drift from their line, then you become the enemy. And I think it's important to understand that this perspective that they're coming, this kind of orientation they're coming out of, to the extent that it is that it goes back like a century. It's not an anarchist. It doesn't come out of the anarchist scene, and although it is most popular somehow or other within what we think of as a sort of anarchist milieu, or at least lifestyle anarchism, or the squat scene, or that kind of the punk scene. But this idea is a profoundly authoritarian idea that was promoted by Stalin and all sorts of nice people who's this idea of deplatforming, this idea of, like, if there's right wingers in the streets doing anything, if they're having a rally, or if they're having a meeting or something, and it is the duty of the communists to, like, beat the shit out of them. And it sounds really romantic, right? Except that it totally backfired. It was a totally horrible tactic. It completely backfired. And anybody that gives a shit about history, or especially the future, should analyze that history of the efforts to squelch fascism in Germany. It didn't work. Hitler rose to power, and if that is not a lesson that people should be able to fucking learn from, this deplatforming thing backfires. And then when they tried it in England in the 70s, it backfired. The British National Party just morphed into other more acceptable sort of suit-wearing political parties, and then they eventually basically took over the Conservative Party, which is now just as right-wing as the British National Party was 40 years ago, in Britain. This deplatforming, these efforts have been central to fueling the rise of the right in the United States. Every time so-called anti-fascists protest a book talk in California or Oregon or Washington or Minnesota, they just are pouring fuel on the fire and helping the right in every possible way. It's a terrible tactic.
I couldn't agree more, and I wonder if you would agree with this, that this, cancel culture deplatforming that you're speaking of, and that we've witnessed so much in these resistance spaces, these movements that are supposedly resisting these authoritarian tactics and techniques. I mean, it sounds to me, you're giving great historical reference to it, but to me, I remember the mainstream media pushing this during the War on Terror. This idea of like, you're either with the U.S. or you're with the terrorists. Like these sorts of like these kinds of ways of dividing people. So if I don't support U.S. imperialism, then I'm with terrorists. Like just there's no gray zone. There's no
gray
place
zone
in the middle. No ability for dialogue. Your experience of interviewing the Heimbeck guy, like that it's a playbook out of the oppressors that these activist spaces have taken and run with, and it's fucking upsetting for sure.
Yeah, it's black and white thinking in the extreme, and then of course it very quickly moves from being a way of opposing the actual far right, and it very quickly becomes like you're opposing any random Christian evangelical or just some author who has some kind of issue with some trans thing, or from 10 years ago they wrote a blog post where they were uncomfortable using the bathroom somewhere when somebody walked in, and then they've turned into a transphobe now. Or this is the kind of mentality that the deplatforming kind of mentality leads to. Very quickly you're not just even if people think the idea of deplatforming the far right is a good idea, which I don't, not because I like the far right, but because I don't like the far right. Even if people think that deplatforming the far right is a good idea, anytime this kind of thing gets going, it's going to get turned into deplatforming everybody, because it's a tactic that the intelligence agents can just use and run with as soon as it's in the sort of public, sort of catalog of possibilities for what's reasonable to do. And they had, like, Shane Burley was on Oregon Public Radio, which is statewide, heard across everywhere in Oregon, millions of people, and they had him on for an hour for their daily talk show, local talk show for Oregon radio, with a total softball interview. And this is a guy who has just put out a book of essays, many of which are advocating things like attacking people for having a book talk or having a speaker you don't like coming to campus, and justifying these kinds of tactics. And I'm not a pacifist, but that you don't need to be this has nothing to do with pacifism. This is about the idea of whether freedom of discourse is a good thing or a bad thing. This is a fundamental question, and it's not. I'm not a fan of freedom of discourse because it happens to be the First Amendment in the U.S. Constitution, or that the Bill of Rights was won by the blood of Shays' Rebellion. That's all relevant and interesting history. But freedom of discourse is not an American idea, and it's not a bourgeois idea, and it never has been. It's a radical idea, and it's
inseparable from human freedom.
What's that?
I'd say it's inseparable from human freedom. Like, if you're
Absolutely.
for freedom, how can you not be for freedom of speech? And all these things go together. They weren't granted to us by the U.S. Constitution. I think that a right is, you're born with it. And then somebody can.
everyone knows that what is censorship. Once they take away the right to speak openly and freely, do they just give it back to you once all the hate speech is gone, or you know what I mean,
Right.
or all the people that everyone doesn't like is canceled? Like, yeah, no, we know how that works.
Yeah.
And I think that it does connect into the trans issue, because I think that trans people are often particularly virulent in opposing the expression of views which they oppose, because they can't really win an argument. They might believe that they are a member of the opposite sex, but it's not in any objective sense true. And I really do think that trans ideology bears quite a bit of responsibility for warping leftist discourse. And I don't, for a long time I kept my mouth shut about it, because it's like I want to respect people's choices, and but at a certain point it does become necessary to stand up for the truth. And if somebody is delusional and wants to pretend to be something that they're not, well, that's okay, I guess. I mean, it's not that okay if it happens to be a symptom of a mental illness. But it's their issue. It's not something that I'm going to dedicate time to setting the record straight about. But I mean, in this case of you being kind of accosted by this trans person, this rally, it sounds like your friends or the organizers of this event ended up taking this person's side because they're a trans person, therefore they're a victim, even when they're the aggressor in the situation, even when it sounded like you were intimidated by them.
Well, I'd say people in the scene in Portland, I think even people who like I talked to a bunch of people who like read my essay, maybe even both of them, that talked about Phoenix Singer's actions and those rallies.
I don't think we introduced this.
Yeah, so she's the particular trans woman who was screaming at me at the top of her lungs and trying to get me to leave the rally that I had just spoken at, and had started screaming at me while I was speaking. And
this is kind of what she does. This is like something she's done many times before.
Yeah, and this is something she's done. She goes around disrupting other left-wingers. And when I mentioned her name and showed her picture to a number of other people I've known for many years who have been long, time, performers or organizers in the Portland area, many of them recognized her. And not in a good way, they recognized her as somebody who had, been disruptive at an event that they were trying to do, because she had some kind of an issue with whatever it was. This is her MO, and this is the kind of way that people are encouraged to behave in that kind of scene. Because when people like me get denounced as by people like Shane Burley, Alexander Reed Ross, Spencer Sunshine, specifically when they say things like David Rovics is a fascist collaborator and should be treated as such, this is very clear what they're talking about. And this is so it frees up people who are probably mentally ill or who are cops or whatever. I mean, there's a lot of possibilities. You don't know. Is this person working with the cops? Are they mentally ill? Are they just whatever? I mean, I think and I've been I'm 56 and I was very young the first time I had a friend who changed their gender and gender identity and also took drugs in the process. And I have known many people for whom that has been the best thing that they've ever done in their lives, for them, for their self-confidence and for their general happiness. And I completely support people being having whatever gender identity they want to have, and I completely support people taking whatever drugs they want to take, whether they're recreational or drugs that will alter their bodies. I think we control our own bodies. We can do whatever we want with them, and I have no problem with any of that. But and I want to be really clear about that. And I have lots of admiration for trans people, and also lots of trans friends and colleagues who are great people and performers, and the vast majority of them don't act anything like Phoenix Singer, but it is also the case that there's a disproportionate number of trans women who grew up as cis men, and often until very recently, who make up a disproportionate number, especially given how many trans people there are in society, which is it's a small minority of society, but they are a disproportionate number of specifically trans women, not trans men, but women who grew up as men are a very disproportionately big number of the disruptive element in these anti-fascist circles, and in Portland, in London, and in other cities as well. But Portland and London are the two that I've had the most negative experiences with this kind of element of society.
If you wanted to be a disruptor to a resistance movement, it does seem like that would be the perfect entry point, in my opinion, because if you are a white male and you were paid, I'm just imagining, this isn't based on fact, but if you're a white male whose job it is to disrupt meetings and make sure that things do not get accomplished, you would be kicked out of there right away due to identity politics and no one wanting to hear what you have to say. Trans women, on the other hand, do get to fall into the oppressed, non-straight white male category.
I honestly think that the whole phenomenon of like non-binary and trans ideology, like I know there's some people who just really, really feel that way, and have since they were children. And I'm not talking about them here, but I am talking about the people who are white and grew up middle class, and the woke ideology tells them that their feelings don't matter, and
that's a very real thing, what you're talking about, and as the father of a teenager in Portland, I have to just amplify what you're saying, because I know lots of Portland teenagers, and right now, who are teenagers right now, and it is so unpopular to be white and so unpopular to be cis, of either gender, and nobody wants to be. And I mean, people are every teenager I know, probably without exception, has found some way to identify themselves as a marginalized person, even though the overwhelming majority of them are white girls and boys.
Yeah, and I've seen this in Ottawa. It got to such wild, insane levels, that you have like a biological male, biological female who are in a heterosexual relationship, but both of them are going by the pronouns of the opposite sex, and it seems to be because they feel that they need to be victims, or they need to be marginalized in order to have it's a currency, and like it's perverse.
It's a currency, legitimacy. Which also maybe brings up Buffy St. Marie. I mean, why do people, who knows what the story is with her, but I know people who have never wanted to be identified by their background for any number of different reasons, but it is absolutely the case today in the sort of left culture, not just the left culture, but the liberal culture, the culture you'll find promoted daily on NPR, is this it is that it's it's better to be from a marginalized community. They're constantly highlighting marginalized communities in a way that they never highlight working class people. Generally, they're not, and they're usually not highlighting working class people from any of these marginalized communities. They're highlighting people who are marginalized in ways other than class,
Yeah.
And often, often really just not being at all clear about, who these people are that they're actually highlighting, who are often like the same, coming from the same family of, people in Los Angeles who are related to some director or some, NPR producer. I mean, it's not an honest take on society, and it's ignoring the vast majority of society in favor of highlighting certain marginalized people within the society, as well as celebrities and all the usual, the president and all that. But there's whenever it's not about like Washington D.C. politics or the wars that are going on or something like that, there's more and more fluff pieces talking about people who are some sexual orientation minority or other kind of marginalized group within society that we're all supposed to be focusing on. And and when this is done over and over again, constantly every day, it's a social engineering effort, and it's an effort to systematically remove any discussion of the massive class divide in American society, and to just don't talk as little as possible about the horrific housing crisis and the how many people are living on the streets. Most of them happen to be white, but let's talk about literally the stories are, this is kind of getting off the track here, but it definitely, they are encouraging people not to want to identify as cis or white, for sure. That's aspect of it.
Yeah,
the
and
other
at the
thing
same
they
time, a lot of normal heterosexual behavior is kind of, now seen as, I think that the reason that so many people are not having sex anymore, and they call it the great sex drought. Less people are sexually active than ever before. A significant percentage of the male population under the age of 30 are incels. They have never had an intimate sexual relationship that has lasted at all, and so to me this is a tragedy. And apparently, because you're not supposed to feel sympathy for men, then no one seems to care. No one seems to see it as a problem. I do. And sex positivity, I think, like when I was a teenager, there was such a thing as sex positive feminism. That's vanished. It's the only kind of sex positivity seems to be in regards to people who are trans or queer, or who are claiming some kind of sexual identity other than.
There's more and more of that. That's been what you're talking about has been more and more the gist of media coverage for several years now, at least. Definitely. To normalize.
We've seen so many people accused of sexual violence, and sometimes it could be a lot of the time a lot of stuff gets rounded up to rape. Like Kit and I, we knew we knew somebody who, like, everybody was under the impression that this person had sexually assaulted somebody, and then 2 years later you find out that they sent a dick pic. And you don't even know who. You don't even know who. Maybe they misread cues or something. It's like, I'm sorry, but sending a dick pic is not fucking sexual assault. Is it inappropriate? Sure.
You create the shroud of suspicion, and then that does its work, of keeping people away from that person, making the person a less effective organizer, and and it even I was saying that this is not such a problem in Europe, but even in Europe, there are venues and towns where I don't ever get gigs anymore, and I know that's because usually they don't tell me, but it's once, at least in two cases, they did. But I know that in the certain cases, especially when it's like a anarchist oriented venue where I used to be playing it every year, and suddenly I'm not hearing from them anymore. It's because they're susceptible to believing these kinds of accusations, and they're susceptible to this kind of thinking, and it does, but so so they're, but the thing is that like with what was done with spreading the shroud of suspicion around other artists, decades ago, the effect can be to just lessen your effectiveness, like cancellation campaigning of any kind, whether it's state sponsored or a grassroots misguided whatever phenomenon, which is so common, or some combination there. We have no idea how much of these, or they're all fueled by algorithms, but we don't know how much of them are state sponsored and how much are sort of coming out of this cultish kind of mindset.
Yeah.
But the point of it always is the impact is always to lessen the effectiveness of organizers or artists or whoever they're aimed at, and it sometimes causes people to give on whatever they've been doing in despair, or move to another country or kill themselves, and all these things have happened. We all know people who have done all of these.
I left Canada because because here I'm here in Mexico, I can be myself, and I know quite a few people who have died after being canceled. I left Canada not long after somebody that I knew, a friend, a comrade, turned up dead. And he had been sort of driven out of organizing circles, and nobody could tell me why. And so I really kind of just suspected it was the typical thing of like making people feel uncomfortable, and this kind of thing. And in his case, I suspect foul play. So I don't think that he did kill himself, but he was, homeless at the time, and friendless. And it was this tragedy. And then, then I reach out to people. One person in particular that I reached out to is this like anarchist pro-com author named Chris Dixon. And, his basic thing was, oh, well, you won't like be bothering people anymore. And, like just this horrible, it just made me kind of feel more resolute, and like I won't have nothing to do with these people. I don't want their approval. I don't want to be a part of their stupid fucking cult, And in the case of somebody else, we were talking on the phone, somebody that I respect, feminist activist who's been active for a long time, and she was kind of being like, oh, we need to talk about male fragility. This is when we were kind of, we thought that he had killed himself. Male fragility. So you're gonna kind of like victim, you're gonna blame someone for not being strong enough to sustain being banished by your tribe, so to speak. And it just made, like, I have been quite vocal about my opinions on feminism, because I do feel that some feminists are able to dehumanize males, like acting as if our feelings don't matter. And I'm here to tell people that your feelings fucking matter. Whether you're white, whether you're male, whether you're trans, whether you're whether you're an animal, your feelings matter. And I don't know. I think that that's a message that we need to drive home. And perhaps this would be a good time to switch over to another topic that I really wanted to talk about, which also has to deal with the dehumanization of certain people. And that is, of course, the situation in Palestine. And David, you are very knowledgeable about this issue. You have been writing songs about it, talking about it for at least 20 years. You've been to Palestine. You've been to, do you want to talk about, do you want to establish your relationship to the Palestinian cause, and then speak about what's going on?
On the subjects that we were basically more or less talking about, as far as cancel campaigning and also the social engineering of it, I've collected together a bunch of my writings in davidrovics.com/trolls, and davidrovics.com/social, which has a lot of that stuff, and a lot of Palestine stuff at davidrovics.com/Palestine. But yeah, what's going on there is a genocidal bombing campaign that the Western media is completely facilitating, but with totally dishonest coverage of what's going on, and which they've been doing for for many decades, always, and for the entire existence of the state of Israel. It's just dishonest journalism coming out of most of the Western media. And I mean, I can say, as somebody who has been following American and broader Western media for many decades, that this is just what we're getting is overwhelmingly just complete propaganda about what's going on there. That is just allowing this to continue. And even with that being the case, and most 60% of U.S. people polled say they support a ceasefire, but nobody in the Senate does, and only a handful of people in the U.S. House of Representatives. And it's what we have is a genocidal regime that is completely sponsored by the U.S. Politically and militarily, and this has been the case for a long time. But now it's all becoming, overwhelmingly apparent to a whole lot of people who, weren't thinking that Israel was actually a fascist state at this point, but it is, and it has been for quite a while, and I mean, and the roots of the phenomenon of the Zionist project and the colonial facilitation of it that gave rise to the state of Israel is the roots of it in the first place are totally about settler colonialism, but and genocide, of the sort of massacring people and just burning their villages down so they run away and go somewhere else, that kind of genocide. That was what founded the state of Israel in 1948. And that's they never let those people back in. Of the 750,000 Palestinians estimated that were driven out of what is now the 48 borders of Israel, 10,000 of them were allowed to return home. And the rest never. And they are populating the Gaza Strip's refugee camps and dying in like Jabalia refugee camp, which was completely destroyed, hundreds of people killed, mostly children. And they are mostly people that were resettled there after they fled their homes in 48 Israel, Palestine. And of course, everything you hear about who they are and how they got there and what's going on in Gaza from the Western media is most of it is just either propaganda or just really unbalanced and giving credence to Israeli politicians who should have no legitimacy in the eyes of the Western media in the first place, because they're blatantly fascists who are advocating genocide. And that's obvious. They're talking about it. They're saying it. They're not just doing it. They're actually saying, this is what we're doing and this is what we're going to continue to do. They're not lying about it. Just like Hitler, they're not lying about it. He said he was going to do it too. He wrote a book about it.
When did you get started championing the Palestinian cause? Because I understand you're Jewish, and I'm just curious if you don't mind sharing with us, like, what brought you to either your activism based around Palestine and also visiting Palestine. Maybe you could give us a bit of your personal history there.
Well, I started reading the New York Times when I was 12 because I wanted to try to understand the world better, and I thought randomly in the little suburb of Connecticut I lived in, that seemed like the best way to do it. And it wasn't too bad of a method. I quickly realized that they had a bias, and I started trying to find other media sources with more difficulty in the library in Wilton High School. But even then, I guess I think 1982 was when I first started reading the Times every day. And and that's when the war on Lebanon was going on, and the Sabra and Shatila massacre. That was one of the first things I started reading newspapers. I was just like, what the hell? This is what's going on out there. But so I was. I could also tell that the Times was trying to tell us that the PLO were terrorists, but at the same time, it's long form journalism. So long form journalism always looks more progressive than short form, because if they tell more of the truth, then the truth will, come through and present itself. And, even if they're trying to start the narrative at some convenient point and stuff like that, if they're giving any background, then it starts becoming clear, like, oh, okay, they're occupying this country and they're facilitating this genocide. So I had a bias in favor of the Palestinian struggle from an early age, and but it wasn't until I didn't really start writing songs and performing until much later, and having any kind of a public voice, and so it was and I hadn't written any songs about Palestine until after I first went to Israel and Palestine in 1999, and then once I wrote a song about after the second Intifada started, then that's what basically set in motion both me being accused of anti-Semitism and me not getting any gigs in Israel anymore. Not that I would necessarily do them. Well, I would do them if there were enough gigs to do for the left in Israel. I don't believe in boycotting the Israeli left. I would totally go there if I could. But there's not enough of a left scene to organize gigs for me there. I never get offers, since the folk music scene is big enough to organize a tour. But if they think I'm an anti-Semite, obviously that's not going to happen. But it was after that when I first visited and wrote a song about it, that I then started hearing from Palestinians from around the world, which was just a profoundly moving and amazing experience. It was 1 week after. At first, I wrote the song, then it got out to the Israeli folk music community. Then I started getting deluged by hate mail, emails from Israelis and also from Zionists across the Jewish diaspora. And then 1 week later, I started getting about 10 times as many emails from Palestinians from across the Palestinian diaspora who had also heard about the song, and so that set in motion me basically playing for a lot of Palestinians and going to Palestine and meeting more and more Palestinians and hearing more stories and writing more songs, and it's a snowball effect. Once you start getting involved with a certain community and a certain struggle and becoming more familiar with it, more knowledgeable about it, writing more about it, you start meeting more and more people from that scene. And so it's just, so now, not that I don't care about the people of Kashmir, but I know very little about what's going on there. And I only know one Kashmiri, and I know a lot of Palestinians. So it's, just how it goes.
It's close to your heart.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, that Palestine is close to my heart, and it's also so iconically sort of representation of the Western double standard around everything, foreign policy.
Oh yeah, people say that it's complicated, but it's not.
That's the propaganda that I couldn't stand from the beginning. And honestly, this is what would get me in arguments with people all the time. I also went to Tel Aviv. I was in Tel Aviv as a dancer back in the day, and I got to do a lot of traveling with this dance company. But it was during one of the times that Israel was bombing Red Crosses and I was there, and it was really upsetting. And I remember trying to have these conversations with people. And if they weren't straight up racist, like we met locals in Tel Aviv on the beach, and we go to smoke a joint, and my friend that I was touring with was like, please don't talk about politics with them. Please don't fuck this up. And I was like, because he was like really excited to be invited to these Israeli girls' apartment. And the minute we smoked that joint, I was just like, I just had to know how they really felt. I said, I was like, how do you feel in your heart, like about the fact that, innocent children and women are being bombed in Red Cross buildings just over there, And
Yeah.
their initial response was, "Oh, Palestinians are dogs. They deserve to die like dogs." Like just this amazing
Yeah.
dehumanization and programming that they've been fed probably since they were children.
Yep.
And honestly, I sat through it. It made me feel really awful, but I sat through it, and then I was like, but in your heart, you can't imagine just the lottery, just rolling the dice, the genetic lottery of being born over there instead of being born over here. You can't imagine yourself being there, receiving bombs, like your whole life, instead of being here on the beach in Tel Aviv, living the fucking high
Yeah.
life. And they were like, and one of them was like, no, honestly, if I think about it too much, it makes me too sad. And then I was like,
Ah,
oh,
well, that's good.
yeah. So here we are. Like now I understand. Now I can begin to understand this knee-jerk, cold, kind of like racist reaction is a protection from actually, being able to feel uh, the sadness of
Yeah.
what's really going on over there.
Yeah.
Anyway,
That's the basis of my song. They're building a wall, actually, too, is that, you're trying to keep separate, not just people, but, really any kind of connection with those people.
They're building a wall between friends, a wall that justifies any means for their ends, a wall between Semites, rich and poor, brothers and sisters from not so long before, many feet thick and 20 feet high. No one can look through it and into the eye of a person you might know, to whom you might confide. Now just a stranger on the other side. They're building a wall between water and land, so we can eat fruit and they can eat sand. A wall to make sure that our orchards will grow and our kids can get fat and not need to know of the cities in ruins and the children in fear, that your fathers and brothers in tanks might be near. A wall to keep quiet that which you fear most, so you don't have to listen to your grandfather's ghost. They're building a wall between future and past, a wall to keep separate the chambers of gas from bulldozers, gunships, and the tears of a child. Dignity, love, and honor defiled, to remove reality from your facts on the ground. A wall to keep distant the terrible sound of the houses that crumble and the children that die. A wall to keep separate the truth from the lie. They're building a wall, and at such a cost, land, money, and safety, and all the lives lost. A wall made of brick, but bricks can be broken when the people of Zion have finally awoken and said no more walls, no more refugees, no more keeping people upon their knees. And then the history books will someday recall, before apartheid was ended, they were building a wall.
What would you say the role of being an artist in resistance movements, or in anti-war movements, and and political struggle at large. Like, how would you define that and your own experience in that?
The role of music in resistance, I think it's been, I mean, it's been really, I mean, music and culture, theater, dance, it's been central to resistance movements around the world since there have been resistance movements, and that's well documented. And that continues to be the case, and it continues to be the case, throughout the Arab world as well, at all the demonstrations. I mean, I'm sure there's in some places like there'd be laws against it, like Saudi Arabia or whatever, but like places like where you're allowed to play music and the Wahhabis are not in power, there's music everywhere. Like the Palestinians protesting every day in Jordan, they're playing lots of music, appropriately, revolutionary music. And it's only in certain corners of the West where really weird people who have spent way too much time in college classrooms or something get the idea that there's something frivolous about music and something like disrespectful or something like that. Like, these are people who have no connection to actual social movements, because if they did, then they would have seen on many occasions in many countries everywhere, how important music is to galvanize, to bring people together, to maintain a sense of community and purpose and everything. I mean, music is essential, just as theater and poetry. And poetry is not so big in North America, but in much of the world, poetry is like massively popular and massively important culturally, and lots of people write it and are engaged with it and appreciate it. Places like all over the Arab world and all of the Chinese speaking world. Yeah.
Well said. Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to. Do you want to comment a bit more on? I personally think that it's really important to create a joyful culture of resistance, and maybe this
That's
was
what music and culture does, that automatically. I mean, because music and culture being part of the resistance movement makes it a joyful resistance movement. I mean, that's by default, that's how it works, because hearing a depressing song about bombs killing people is actually, bizarrely, a joyful experience. In a way, it's a cathartic experience when an artist or a dance troupe or any number of other, any kind of art is expressing what you are thinking about and feeling every day. That is cathartic, and catharsis leads to joy. And you have a cathartic experience. It makes you be more connected to the people around you, to the movement and everything. And it's essential. And of course, people need to laugh and dance and not just be depressed all the time. And that so it's, I think, also personally as an artist, I think it's very important to do songs that make people laugh and enjoy life and think about the funny things. I do a lot of that, but
That's interesting that you mentioned that, because that was actually until maybe about like 4 or 5 months ago, that was a big part of what I was doing with Nevermore. But it was a kind of maybe a bit of a mean type of humor where I was, like mocking a lot of my political opponents, I guess, the people that I was frustrated with, having been part of this, anarchist movement for a long time, and then seeing a lot of people turn their backs on me. Like we took a strong stance on the COVID issue, and later on, kind of felt obligated to kind of stand with some people who are coming under attack for taking, a controversial stance on the issue of trans ideology as well. Like basically myself being a psychiatric survivor who was under a court order to take antipsychotic medication against my will. I have a major fucking hate on for pharmaceutical industry. But about like at a certain point, I felt like people were starting to listen to what I had to say, and so I decided to change tact and to be a little more diplomatic. and our audience has exploded since that point. So I do think that
I think
we
it's a
are.
good decision.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I did want to ask you actually. I mean, now that you are a part of Nevermore, if you have any advice for us, because really having someone of your stature on board is a big boost. I'd say that now. I mean, we don't actually identify as left. Like we kind of see ourselves as post-leftists, and a lot of words are just no longer very helpful in describing the current political climate. But I mean, we come out of the same background as you do, anti-globalization movement. And, the left used to be about, class war and opposing, the rich basically, and, their control over the media and the culture and all these things. So we're not going to pretend that that's not the case. And so I guess arguably then we're in somewhat of a kind of influential position in amongst leftists who are kind of engaged in the same process of reorientation that we've been engaged with for a number of years. Basically recognizing that something is fucking gone seriously wrong, and the recognition is widespread at this point. Even like you were saying, Kit, before David came on, that's like, even the anarchist left, they're like, no, we're not left. Like the term is toxic. Who wants to be seen as a leftist anymore? It used to be that way with liberal, but now it's also that. Do you want to comment about Canada and leftism in Canada?
Me?
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I thought you were asking a question to David about advice for Nevermore, but yeah, we can segue into that. I would say, yeah, within the revolutionary anarchist scene that I sort of been working within in Indigenous sovereignty and other things like that, I definitely did notice. I mean, this will take us back to stuff we were talking about earlier, but I think that when you work in these polarizations, black and white thinking, this right left kind of world, the duality divider that social media has also just and algorithms have just fractured in it. What you end up with is, if you're left, then you're for all of these things, and if you're not for all those things, then you're like, well, then what am I? Am I right now? And so again, your appeal to sort of include white males or for example white straight males within the movement, to actually create space for that, and to not create to not try to push people out of the left movement. I think I almost feel like we're a bit late on that, because I think everything that I've witnessed going down in this anarchist left movement recently it is a recruitment tool for the right. If you want to go back to right and left divides, you know what I mean? Like it ends up becoming a recruitment tool, because the left, your experience, David, with this Phoenix singer screaming at you, with all that you do, becomes like a kind of a, as awful as it is, it sort of becomes like a caricature of think what's happening to the left. And so if you use that as like a comic, like in the New York Times comic section, like it would almost describe sort of what's really taking place. And so here we find ourselves sort of rudderless at some point, but things like Nevermore has and Substack, and suddenly you find that there are you're not this little tiny group of 3 or 4 people that feel this way, but that there's a broad movement that kind of got fractured. And I think we touched on maybe the causes of that, which could have been intentional, could have been sort of self-driven by people that thought they were doing the right thing, but here we are. And I guess what advice would you have, I guess, going forward, as far as, I mean, I know Crow has sort of like tried different approaches, as far as like reaching out.
We're still
I'm of this
controversial in a different way, I guess.
Yeah, my school is being authentic. I always think that being authentic, being real, 100%. I mean, humor is great. We were talking about music and the power of music and art, to sort of lift spirits in a bleak and depressing reality of never-ending wars spreading across the planet. Like I think we need more humor. When I hear comedians and humorists that are able to talk about current states of things that are politically pretty depressing, I find it more palatable. If you're able to laugh, if you're able to take lift your spirit a little bit while you talk about these things, like I think if there's any direction to go in that, that's what I would
Yeah,
advocate for.
that's all good, but I think also what Crow was talking about, especially in terms of not just being negative or attacking people. I mean, we just avoiding that almost entirely, and certainly avoiding ever being doctrinaire about anything, and being open to different perspectives on everything, and not attacking anybody for having a different perspective on something. I mean, that's all great places to start with, because freedom of thought and discourse, and being able to express ideas and opinions without getting shot down for some kind of perceived transgression or whatever. I mean, ideas deserve to be discussed openly and freely, and not with some kind of like really restrictive self-censorship and word policing going on, so that we can't even understand what we're trying to say or what each other is trying to say. We got to be able to talk about things, and people have to be able to have different opinions, and not, we have to, at what point, there's to reject black and white thinking. There are not two positions on pharmaceutical drugs. There are not two positions on lockdown measures. There are many, many positions on all of those things. There's not two positions on whether capitalism is all good or all bad. It's just, most of everything in life are far more than two very valid positions on anything. This black and white thinking sucks. It doesn't work. It's counterproductive, pointless, but it's a great way to divide a social movement, or cause people to behave in self-destructive ways.
Oh yeah, there's one thing that that we didn't talk about when we were talking about Shane Burley and Alexander Reed Ross before, and that is It's Going Down. So I have now published something which I don't have a smoking gun or anything, but I think that it's very suspicious how It's Going Down, this anarchist news website that kind of came out of nowhere about, like 2016 or around there. They just consistently fuel this extremely divisive, Kafka-esque cancellation campaigning. And, they published a hit piece about me and my friends with NEVERMORE. They published a hit piece about you. Would you like to speak about the possibility that It's Going Down is part of some sort of counterintelligence or ideological subversion effort on the part of U.S. law enforcement?
I think that if they're not, if there is no involvement with intelligence services with It's Going Down, then it would be a ridiculous oversight on the part of the intelligence services. Because of course it's exactly the sort of thing that they want to encourage. Is the kind of cancellation campaigning and attacking of people on scurrilous bases that It's Going Down is doing, along with their other stuff that they're doing, which is largely revolves around basically making a dumpster fire look like a revolution. That's the kind of their basic MO. But when they're not trying to make a dumpster fire look like a revolution, then they're attacking dissenting leftists who have some kind of it's like me or you, or it's if they're not a police operation, then I'm not sure what the cops are doing. There's a lot of cops out there who would be interested in infiltrating groups like that, and certainly the way that they orient it seems like they would be more than a little compromised. But one thing that I've noticed just on the streets, I mean, I haven't toured in the US extensively for 10 years now, but but I was touring in the US extensively from the mid 90s until 2013, and somewhat since then in different parts, when I can, mainly on the West Coast and the Northeast, but the sort of mentality in that kind of scene, in what we might call the Black Bloc nexus, or this kind of scene, there's always been it's always been susceptible to police infiltration, and so for so many reasons. The anonymity of it lends itself to that, as well as security culture, as well as just the basic desire to destroy things. That all can be easily manipulated by intelligence agents. But what I've noticed at being very close to lots of people in the Black Bloc, for many years, for many years, if I walk through a crowd of Black Bloc in North America or Europe, I'm recognized and appreciated for existing by lots of people. That's the milieu that I've been in. I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but that's where I'm coming from, And there's lots of wonderful people in that scene, in the Black Bloc scene, and that's been the case for a long time and continues to be. Anti-fascist Black Bloc, whatever we're calling it, But the Black Bloc lost the plot in 2009 and had never regained it. So, whatever it is, whatever ideological forces, whatever it is that's, educating the teenagers coming up since 2009, it's really not good. And Shane Burley and Alexander Reed Ross and these kind of people are definitely a big part of it, and as is Twitter and Facebook and algorithms and intelligence agencies and who knows whatever else. But from 2009 to the present, things got really weird. It used to be that like in Toronto in 2010 at the G20 there. And by the way, my battery's going to die soon, but on this laptop, and we're going over, but over
Okay.
half an hour and a half. But there in Toronto in 2010, there was no way that they could do the kinds of things that the Black Bloc was hoping to do. It was completely unrealistic. The numbers weren't even remotely there. And anybody in the Black Bloc would have known that as a matter of obvious thinking, a few years earlier. But something changed along the way. The information wasn't getting passed on. The lack of any kind of cultural, I don't know, but
it was massively infiltrated, and
probably,
jail for that. And we should have learned our lesson after that, is that it's just not worth the cost. You do a cost benefit analysis on smashing some windows, and the number of people who were burnt out, and the cost of raising money for lawyers, and
But even if you want to do something really that a lot of us could think was a really nice idea, like breaking down the fence surrounding these meetings that they fence off with these massive militarized fences, that's a perfectly worthwhile goal. But you're not going to do that with 800 people when there's 20,000 cops. That's ridiculous. And in Portland, you had groups of literally, sometimes often less than 100 people trying to lay siege to a police station and burn it down. That's ridiculous. And it's, maybe you should appreciate, and they're lovely people. They're fans of my music, some of them, and they write me regularly. I think it's a laudable goal, but it's just completely unrealistic and out of touch with reality for a few dozen people to think that they're going to burn down a police station. It's preposterous. So how did that happen? I don't know, but you probably have lots of correct ideas about that. But I guess we should probably wrap this up. Although I've been really enjoying it. I have a gig tonight, and my battery's going to die.
All right.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Rovics. We really appreciate everything that you bring to the table, and thank you.
Take care, man.
$1.8 million people surrounded on all sides. Refugees since 48, since 67 occupied. The only reason they're not starving is down to the UN. Most have never left, they're stuck in the lion's den, the most crowded place on earth, and there they'll stay. They can't visit cousins a half hour's drive away. Drones overhead constantly. Who will die tomorrow? A daily mystery in Gaza. The settlers moved out, fighter jets moved in. In Gaza there's just no way that you can win. You can't take out a copter with an antiquated gun. You're just a target sitting in the sun, waiting for your death to come raining from the sky, where the end really is nigh. You can hear a sonic boom and see a flashing light every hour of the day, every hour of the night in Gaza. There are no shelters, nowhere you can hide. Life is nothing like it is on the other side. There's nothing to post about the traumatic stress. There's never more, usually less. And still some people wonder, they insist on asking why anyone would be so mad as to reply, so mad as to think that it might make sense to lob some missiles over the fence from Gaza.